When I first saw the job posting for the night clerk at Stop and Save, I thought it was a mistake. Night shift clerk needed. Double pay. Flexible hours. No experience required. In a city where every job paid the bare minimum and wanted years of experience, this felt like a scam. But I was desperate. Rent was overdue, my fridge was empty, and my phone was one bill away from being cut off. So, I put on my cleanest shirt and went for the interview, half expecting to find a locked door or a pyramid scheme. The store was on the edge of town, next to an abandoned gas station. It was almost 8 p.m. when I arrived, but the place was lit up like a beacon. I stepped inside and was hit by the smell of lemon cleaner and burnt coffee. The shelves were perfectly organized, every label facing forward, and behind the counter stood a man in his late 40s with tired eyes and a jaw that looked like it hadn't smiled in years. "You must be Daniel," he said, glancing at a clipboard. "That's me," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I'm Mr. Harris, the night manager. This job is simple if you follow the rules. The pay is good because most people don't last. You want to last, you follow the rules. That's it." I gave a nervous laugh, thinking he was joking or maybe just trying to scare me. Rules? Like security stuff? Cash handling. Mr. Harris didn't laugh. He reached under the counter and pulled out a battered old notebook, the kind you'd find in a lost and found box. On the cover, written in faded marker, were the words, "Night shift rules, strictly confidential." He slid it across the counter. "Read these. Memorize them. Every night, no exceptions. If you think a rule is stupid, or you feel like ignoring it, remember, I'm not responsible for what happens." I opened the notebook, expecting a list of boring procedures. Instead, I found this. Never start a shift alone. At exactly 11 p.m., lock the front doors, even if customers are still inside. No alcohol sales after 2 a.m., no matter what. If you hear noises from the bathroom after 10 p.m., ignore them. If a regular customer acts strange, avoid eye contact. If the lights blink 3 times, go to the back room and stay there for exactly 7 minutes. If a tall man comes in for coffee and doesn't speak, give him a free cup and don't ask questions. I looked up, half smiling. Is this for real? Is this some kind of prank? Mr. Harris's face didn't change. People have come and gone, Daniel. The ones who follow the rules are still around. The ones who don't, well, let's just say they don't come back. Do you want the job or not? I nodded, still thinking it was all just a weird initiation. Double pay was double pay, and I could handle a little drama for that. Mr. Harris gave me a quick tour of the store. Everything looked normal. Rows of snacks, coolers humming, security cameras blinking in the corners. But everywhere I looked, I saw sticky notes with the rules written on them. On the backroom door, above the bathroom, even taped to the coffee machine. "These are just reminders," Mr. Harris said. "When you're tired, when you think nothing's going to happen, that's when you need them most." That night, I started my first shift. Mr. Harris showed me how to work the register, how to check inventory, and then, at 10:45, he said, "I'm heading out. You'll be with Ben tonight. He'll help you. Don't forget to lock the doors at 11 o'clock." Ben was a quiet, skinny guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He helped me restock the shelves, then sat behind the counter, scrolling on his phone. At 10:59, a customer came up with a bag of chips and a soda. I rang him up, glancing at the clock. 11 o'clock on the dot. I remembered the rule and walked over to the front doors, locking them with a heavy click. The customer looked surprised. "Hey man, I'm still inside." "Store policy," I said, trying to sound like I did this every night. You'll have to leave through the back exit. He grumbled, but took his snacks and followed Ben to the back. Ben gave me a nod. You did the right thing. First night, you break a rule, you don't want to know what happens. I tried to laugh it off, but something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. By 11:30, the store was quiet. Ben was in the storeroom, and I was at the counter, watching the security monitors. That's when I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from the bathroom. At first, I thought it was a rat. Then I remembered Rule 4. Ignore any noises from the bathroom after 10 p.m. The scratching got louder, like fingernails dragging across tile. I called out to Ben, "Hey, do you hear that in the bathroom?" He poked his head out, eyes wide. "Don't go near it. Just ignore it. Last month, a guy went in there after hours. He never came back." I sat back down, heart pounding, and stared at the register screen. After a few minutes, the scratching stopped. At 1:45 a.m., a tall man walked in. He didn't say a word, just went straight to the coffee machine, poured himself a black coffee, and stood at the counter. I remembered Rule 7. Give him a free coffee, don't ask questions. I handed him the cup. He nodded once and walked to the far corner of the store, standing perfectly still. Ben whispered, "He comes every night. Never talk. But if something bad happens, he's always here." I tried to convince myself it was all just coincidence. But the night was far from over. The rest of my first night passed in a haze of nerves and caffeine. Every time the wind rattled the glass doors or the cooler compressor kicked on, I jumped. Ben didn't say much, but every so often, he'd glance at the clock or check the sticky notes with the rules, as if reassuring himself they hadn't changed. At 2:01 a.m., a man in a wrinkled suit stumbled up to the locked front doors and started banging. He looked exhausted, his tie askew, eyes wild. I watched him on the security monitor as he pounded on the glass, mouthing something I couldn't hear. Ben came up behind me, peering over my shoulder. "Don't open it," he said quietly. I nodded, remembering Rule 2. The man's face twisted in frustration. He tried the handle, then pressed his face to the glass, staring directly into the camera. For a moment, I thought he was going to break the door. Then, as suddenly as he'd appeared, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the parking lot. Ben let out a slow breath. "You'll get used to it. Or you won't. Either way, don't break the rules." I wanted to ask him what would happen if I did, but something in his voice told me not to. Instead, I busied myself with inventory, counting candy bars and restocking the gum. The minutes crawled by. Every so often, I'd glance at the tall man in the corner. He never moved, never spoke, just stood there, sipping his coffee. At 3:15, the lights flickered once, then twice. I froze, heart pounding. Ben looked up from his phone, eyes wide. The lights blinked a third time. "Back room. Now," he hissed, grabbing my arm. We hurried through the swinging door into the cramped storage area. Ben shut the door behind us and checked his watch. 7 minutes. Not a second less. I tried to steady my breathing. "What happens if we leave early?" Ben shook his head. "Don't. Just don't." The storage room was cold and smelled of cardboard and bleach. I could hear faint noises from the store, something scraping, a low hum, the sound of glass rattling. I wanted to ask Ben what was out there, but he just stared at his watch, counting down the seconds. At exactly 7 minutes, he nodded. "We can go back." We stepped out into the store. Everything looked normal, but the air felt heavier, like a thunderstorm had just passed through. The tall man was gone. The coffee machine was spotless, not a drop spilled. I shivered, rubbing my arms. Ben went back to the counter, acting like nothing had happened. I tried to do the same, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The rest of the shift passed in uneasy silence. At 5:45, Mr. Harris returned, looking as tired as ever. He glanced around the store, then at us. "Everything is okay?" Ben nodded. "No problems." Mr. Harris looked at me. "You remember the rules?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, I remember." He smiled for the first time, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good. You'll do fine, Daniel. Just keep following them." I left the store as the sun was rising, the sky streaked with pink and gold. My apartment had never felt so safe. I collapsed onto my bed, fully dressed, and slept until the afternoon. When I woke up, I tried to convince myself it had all been nerves and imagination. But when I checked my phone, I had a text from Ben. "Don't forget, 11 o'clock, lock the doors." The next few nights settled into a strange routine. I'd arrive at 10:30, go over the rules, and work the shift with Ben. We'd lock the doors at 11 o'clock, ignore the bathroom after 10 o'clock, and give the tall man his coffee if he showed up. Sometimes the lights would flicker, and we'd hide in the back room for 7 minutes, listening to the store creak and groan. I started to notice things. The regulars who came in during the day were friendly, chatty, normal. But at night, if one of them came in and acted off, walking stiffly, speaking in a flat voice, or staring too long at nothing, Ben would quietly steer me away from them. We'd avoid eye contact, ring up their purchases, and let them leave without a word. One night, a woman I recognized from the morning rush came in just before midnight. She usually bought coffee and a lottery ticket, always smiling and making small talk. But tonight, she moved strangely, her head tilted at an odd angle, her eyes unfocused. Ben nudged me. Rule 5. I kept my gaze on the register, barely glancing at her as I rang up her items. She didn't say a word, just stared at me with a blank expression. When she left, the air in the store felt lighter, as if a storm had passed. After she was gone, Ben let out a shaky breath. "You did good. Never look them in the eye." "Never." I wanted to ask what would happen if I did, but I was starting to understand that some questions were better left unanswered. By the end of my first week, the rules were burned into my brain. I checked the clock obsessively, locked the doors at exactly 11 o'clock, and never, ever went near the bathroom after 10 o'clock. I started to feel like I was living in a different world, one where the normal laws of reality didn't apply. But the pay was good, better than any job I'd ever had. And as long as I followed the rules, I was safe. Or so I thought. It was my second week on the job when I started to notice the toll the night shift was taking on me. I was tired all the time, my appetite was gone, and I jumped at every unexpected sound. My friends stopped inviting me out, and my mom's calls went unanswered. I told myself it was just the hours, the stress of a new job, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. One night, Ben called in sick. Mr. Harris texted me, "You'll be working with Sarah tonight. She's new, but she knows the rules." I arrived early, wanting to make a good impression. Sarah was already there, standing behind the counter, nervously flipping through the rule book. She looked up as I walked in. "You must be Daniel." "I'm Sarah." "Yeah, that's me. First week." She nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm still getting used to the rules. They're weird." I smiled, trying to reassure her. "You'll get used to them. Just follow them, no matter what. That's the only way." We went through the usual routine, restocking shelves, checking inventory, making small talk. At 10:59, I locked the front doors. Sarah watched me, her hands trembling slightly. "Does it ever get easier?" she asked. I hesitated. "You get used to it. but it never really feels normal. The night was quiet at first. A few regulars came in before midnight, nothing out of the ordinary. At 1:30 a.m., the tall man appeared. Sarah froze when she saw him, her eyes wide. I whispered, "Just give him a coffee. Don't say anything." She did as I said, and the man nodded, moving to his usual corner. Sarah let out a shaky breath. "Who is he?" I shrugged. "No idea. He's just part of the job." At 2:05, a woman in a red coat banged on the front doors, shouting to be let in. Sarah looked at me, panic in her eyes. "Don't open it," I said firmly. "No matter what." The woman's voice grew desperate, pleading, then angry. She pounded on the glass until her hands bled, then suddenly stopped and walked away, vanishing into the night. Sarah stared at the door, her face pale. What if she really needed help? I shook my head. If she did, she would have come before 11. That's the rule. Sarah didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. At 3 o'clock, the lights flickered once, twice, 3 times. I grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her into the back room, closing the door behind us. 7 minutes, I whispered, checking my watch. We waited in silence, listening to the faint sounds from the store. Something heavy dragged across the floor, and the air grew cold. Sarah squeezed my hand, her knuckles white. When the 7 minutes were up, we stepped back into the store. Everything looked normal, but the air felt charged, like after a lightning storm. The tall man was gone, his coffee cup sitting empty on the counter. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide. "What was that?" I shook my head. "I don't know. I don't want to know." The rest of the shift passed without incident. When Mr. Harris arrived at dawn, Sarah and I were both exhausted. He looked at us, then at the empty coffee cup. "You followed the rules?" We nodded. He smiled, that same tired, hollow smile. "Good. That's all that matters." A few days later, Ben was back. He looked worse than before, dark circles under his eyes, jumpy, distracted. I asked if he was okay, but he just shrugged. "Nightmares," he said. "You'll get them too, eventually." I didn't ask what his nightmares were about. I already had a pretty good idea. That night, something changed. At 10:45, a man I'd never seen before walked in. He was tall, thin, with a crooked smile and eyes that didn't seem to focus on anything. He wandered the aisles, picking up random items and putting them back in the wrong places. Ben watched him closely. "Don't talk to him. Don't look at him." I kept my head down, pretending to check the register. The man eventually came to the counter, placing a single pack of gum in front of me. I rang him up without meeting his gaze. He didn't say a word, just stared at me with that crooked smile. Then he turned and walked out, disappearing into the night. Ben let out a breath he'd been holding. That was close. I nodded, my heart racing. What would have happened if I'd looked at him? Ben shook his head. "You don't want to know." The next night, I was alone for the first time. Ben had called out again, and Sarah was scheduled for the morning shift. Mr. Harris texted, "You'll be fine. Just follow the rules." I tried to act brave, but as the clock ticked closer to 11 o'clock, my nerves got the better of me. I locked the doors, checked the bathroom, and made sure the back room was stocked. At 11:30, the scratching started in the bathroom. I ignored it, focusing on the register. At 1:45, the tall man came in, got his coffee, and stood in the corner. At 2:10, someone banged on the front doors, screaming to be let in. I ignored it, but at 3 o'clock, the lights flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. I ran to the back room, slamming the door behind me. I checked my watch, counting down the 7 minutes. The sounds from the store were louder this time, something heavy dragging, glass shattering, a low, guttural growl. When the time was up, I stepped out. The store was a mess, shelves knocked over, products scattered, the coffee machine hissing steam. The tall man was gone. I cleaned up as best I could, my hands shaking. When Mr. Harris arrived, he didn't say a word about the mess. He just looked at me and nodded. You followed the rules. That's all that matters. After that night, I started to understand why the pay was so high. It wasn't just the hours or the late-night weirdos. It was the constant, gnawing fear that something was always watching, always waiting for you to slip up. The rules weren't just guidelines. They were the only thing keeping you alive. I became obsessed with them. I wrote them on sticky notes and put them everywhere, in my wallet, on my phone, even taped to my bathroom mirror at home. I checked the clock every few minutes during my shift, terrified I'd miss the 11 p.m. deadline. I double-checked the locks, triple-counted the minutes in the back room, and never, ever looked anyone in the eye if they seemed even a little bit off. Ben and Sarah noticed the change in me. We didn't talk much about what happened at night, but there was a silent understanding between us. We were all just trying to survive. One night, Sarah pulled me aside before our shift started. "Have you ever wondered why the rules are so specific?" she asked quietly. I shrugged. I try not to. I just follow them. She hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. I heard a rumor. Mr. Harris wasn't always the night manager. There was someone before him, someone who broke the rules. I felt a chill run down my spine. What happened? She shook her head. No one knows. He just disappeared. They say the store was closed for a week after that. When it reopened, Mr. Harris was in charge, and the rules were everywhere. I didn't know what to say. The idea that someone could just vanish, erased by whatever haunted this place, made my skin crawl. That night, the store was busier than usual. A storm was rolling in, and people were stocking up on snacks and drinks. By 10:45, the rain was coming down in sheets, thunder rumbling in the distance. I was grateful for the distraction until I realized the clock was ticking closer to 11 o'clock. I hurried to the front doors, locking them just as a man in a soaked raincoat rushed up, pounding on the glass. "Let me in. Please, I just need to use the phone." I shook my head, mouthing sorry through the glass. He looked desperate, but I remembered the rule. No exceptions. He stood there for a long moment, rain streaming down his face, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the storm. Sarah came up beside me, her face pale. "You did the right thing." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the guilt. What if he really needed help? What if I'd just left someone out there to die? The rest of the night was tense. The storm knocked out the power at 1:30 a.m., plunging the store into darkness. The emergency lights flickered on, casting long, eerie shadows across the aisles. Ben, who had come in to cover the late shift, grabbed a flashlight. "Stay close. If the lights blink 3 times, we go to the back room. No matter what." We moved through the store, checking the doors and windows. The rain hammered the roof, and the wind howled through the cracks. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. At 2 a.m., the power came back on. The lights buzzed and flickered, but didn't blink 3 times. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. At 2:15, the tall man appeared, his coat dripping water onto the floor. He didn't say a word, just took his coffee and stood in his usual corner. I handed him a fresh cup, my hands shaking. Sarah whispered, "Do you think he's human?" I glanced at the man, his face hidden in shadow. "I don't know. I don't want to find out." The rest of the shift passed in uneasy silence. When the sun finally rose, I felt like I'd survived a war. A few days later, I was working alone again. Ben was out sick, and Sarah had switched to day shifts. Mr. Harris assured me I'd be fine, but I felt exposed, vulnerable. At 10:30, a woman came in, her face hidden by a hood. She wandered the aisles, picking up random items and putting them back. I kept my distance, watching her on the security monitors. At 10:59, I locked the doors. The woman was still inside, standing by the freezer section. I approached her cautiously. "Ma'am, we're closing the front doors now. If you need anything else, you'll have to use the back exit." She didn't respond, just stared at the frozen pizzas. I felt a prickle of fear. Rule 5. If a regular customer acts strange, avoid eye contact. I kept my gaze on the floor. "Ma'am, I can show you to the back exit." She finally turned, her face pale and expressionless. She followed me to the back, never saying a word. When she stepped outside, I locked the door behind her, my heart pounding. The rest of the night was quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly avoided something terrible. By the end of my first month, the rules were second nature. I moved through the store like a ghost, avoiding eye contact, locking doors, and counting minutes. The pay was good, but I was starting to wonder if it was worth it. One night, as I was leaving at dawn, Mr. Harris stopped me. "You're doing well, Daniel. Most people don't last this long." I nodded, too tired to respond. He looked at me, his eyes serious. "Just remember, one mistake is all it takes." I nodded again, the weight of his words settling over me like a shroud. The weeks blurred together. My life outside the store faded into the background. I slept during the day, worked at night, and lived by the rules. Sometimes, I wondered if I was losing my mind. I'd catch myself reciting the rules under my breath while brushing my teeth or waiting for the bus. I stopped answering calls from friends and family. The world outside the store felt less real than the one inside. One night, something changed. It was a Tuesday, and the air felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. I arrived at the store to find Mr. Harris waiting for me, a grim look on his face. "Ben's not coming in tonight," he said. "You'll be alone." I tried to hide my anxiety. "I'll be fine. I know the rules." He nodded, but didn't look convinced. "Just be careful. If anything feels wrong, call me, no matter what time." I promised I would, but as soon as he left, I felt the weight of the empty store pressing in on me. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and every shadow seemed to move just out of the corner of my eye. At 10:59, I locked the front doors. The parking lot was empty, the streetlights flickering in the distance. I checked the bathroom, the back room, and the cooler, making sure everything was in order. At 11:30, the scratching started in the bathroom. I ignored it, focusing on the register. At 12:15, the tall man appeared, his coat dry despite the rain outside. I handed him his coffee, avoiding his gaze. At 1 a.m., the lights flickered once, then twice. I held my breath, waiting for the third blink. It didn't come. I let out a shaky sigh and went back to restocking the shelves. At 1:45, I heard a voice outside the front doors. It was a woman, her voice muffled by the glass. "Please, let me in. I just need to use the phone. My car broke down." I shook my head, refusing to look at her. Rule 2. Never open the doors after 11 o'clock. She kept pleading, her voice growing more desperate. "Please, I'm scared. There's something out here." I forced myself to ignore her, focusing on the inventory sheet in front of me. After a few minutes, the voice stopped. I glanced at the security monitor. The parking lot was empty. At 2 a.m., the store went silent. The hum of the coolers, the buzz of the lights, even the distant sound of traffic, all gone. It was as if the world had stopped. Then, the lights blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. I ran to the back room, slamming the door behind me. I checked my watch, counting down the 7 minutes. The silence was absolute, pressing in on me from all sides. Then, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving through the store. They stopped outside the backroom door. I held my breath, heart pounding in my chest. A low, guttural voice whispered, "Daniel." I squeezed my eyes shut, refusing to answer. The footsteps moved away, fading into the distance. When 7 minutes had passed, I opened the door and stepped out. The store was empty, but the air felt wrong, thick and heavy, like breathing underwater. The tall man was gone. The coffee machine was spotless. I finished my shift in a daze, barely aware of what I was doing. When Mr. Harris arrived at dawn, he took one look at me and frowned. "Rough night." I nodded, unable to find the words. He put a hand on my shoulder. "You did good. You followed the rules. That's all that matters." The next night, Ben was back. He looked pale and exhausted, but he tried to smile. "Sorry I left you alone," he said. "I had a family emergency." I didn't ask for details. We both knew there were some things you didn't talk about. That night, the store was quiet. No scratching, no voices, no flickering lights. For the first time in weeks, I felt almost normal. At 2:30 a.m., a man in a business suit came in, his tie perfectly straight, his hair slicked back. He walked up to the counter and smiled. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth and pleasant. "I'd like to buy a bottle of whiskey." I glanced at the clock. 2:31 a.m. Rule 3. No alcohol sales after 2 a.m. "I'm sorry, sir. We can't sell alcohol after 2. He leaned in, his smile never wavering. "I'll pay double, triple even. I just need a drink." I shook my head. "Store policy. I can't." His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, his face seemed to shift, his features blurring, his skin rippling like water. Then, just as quickly, he was normal again. He straightened his tie, nodded, and walked out. Ben let out a shaky breath. "You did the right thing." I nodded, my hands trembling. What would have happened if I'd sold it to him? Ben shook his head. "You don't want to know." By the end of my 2nd month, I was a different person. I moved through the world like a shadow, always watching, always waiting for something to go wrong. The rules were my lifeline, the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something worse than anything I'd faced so far. It was a Friday night when everything changed. The shift started like any other. I arrived at 10:30, went through the checklist, and recited the rules under my breath. Ben was there, looking tired but alert. We worked in silence, restocking shelves and counting the register. At 10:59, I locked the front doors. The parking lot was empty, the street outside silent. At 11:30, the scratching started in the bathroom. I ignored it as always. At 12:15, the tall man came in, took his coffee, and stood in the corner. Ben and I exchanged a glance, but said nothing. At 1 a.m., the lights flickered once, twice, but not a third time. I felt a wave of relief. The worst nights were always the ones with 3 blinks. At 1:45, a woman in a blue dress appeared at the front doors, banging and pleading to be let in. Her voice was muffled, but I could hear the desperation. I kept my eyes on the register, refusing to look at her. Ben did the same. At 2 o'clock, the store went silent. The hum of the coolers, the buzz of the lights, even the distant sound of traffic, all gone. I felt a chill run down my spine. Then, the lights blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. Ben grabbed my arm. Back room. Now. We ran, slamming the door behind us. I checked my watch, counting down the 7 minutes. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of our breathing. Then, we heard it, a low, guttural growl, followed by the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. The temperature dropped, our breath visible in the air. Ben squeezed my shoulder. "Don't open the door, no matter what." I nodded, my heart pounding. The growling grew louder, closer. Something slammed against the backroom door, hard enough to make it rattle on its hinges. I pressed my back against the wall, praying the door would hold. After what felt like an eternity, the sounds faded. The temperature rose, and the silence returned. 7 minutes passed. Ben checked his watch. "We can go back." We stepped out into the store. The shelves were knocked over, products scattered across the floor. The coffee machine was hissing steam, and the tall man was gone. I started to clean up, my hands shaking. Ben helped, working in silence. At 3 a.m., the front doors rattled. I looked at the security monitor. A man stood outside, his face hidden in shadow. He pounded on the glass, shouting something I couldn't hear. Ben shook his head. "Ignore him." I did as I was told, focusing on the mess in front of me. At 3:30, the man was still there, pacing back and forth. Then, he stopped and pressed his face to the glass. For a moment, I thought I saw his eyes, black, empty, endless. I looked away, my heart racing. At 4 o'clock, he was gone. The rest of the shift passed in uneasy silence. When Mr. Harris arrived at dawn, he took one look at the store and frowned. "Rough night." I nodded, too tired to speak. He put a hand on my shoulder. "You did good. You followed the rules. That's all that matters." The next night, I was alone again. Ben had called out, and Sarah was still on day shifts. I felt exposed, vulnerable. At 10:59, I locked the front doors. The parking lot was empty, the streetlights flickering in the distance. At 11:30, the scratching started in the bathroom. I ignored it, focusing on the register. At 12:15, the tall man came in, took his coffee, and stood in the corner. At 1 a.m., the lights flickered once, twice, 3 times. I ran to the back room, slamming the door behind me. I checked my watch, counting down the 7 minutes. The sounds from the store were louder this time. Something heavy dragging, glass shattering, a low, guttural growl. When the time was up, I stepped out. The store was a mess, shelves knocked over, products scattered, the coffee machine hissing steam. The tall man was gone. I cleaned up as best I could, my hands shaking. When Mr. Harris arrived, he didn't say a word about the mess. He just looked at me and nodded. "You followed the rules. That's all that matters." By the end of my 3rd month, I was a different person. I moved through the world like a shadow, always watching, always waiting for something to go wrong. The rules were my lifeline, the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something worse than anything I'd faced so far. It was the middle of my 4th month when the nightmare started. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, convinced I'd forgotten to lock the doors or missed the 3rd flicker of the lights. Sometimes, I'd dream of the tall man standing at the foot of my bed, silent and watchful, his coffee cup steaming in the darkness. Other times, I'd hear scratching from my own bathroom at home, so really I'd get up and check, only to find nothing but silence. I tried to talk to Ben about it, but he just shook his head. "It's normal. You get used to it. Or you don't." Sarah, on the other hand, seemed to be coping better. She'd switched back to night shifts, and we often worked together. She was calm, methodical, and never questioned the rules. If anything, she was even more careful than I was. One night, as we were restocking the shelves, she said quietly, "Do you ever wonder what would happen if we just stopped following the rules?" I stared at her, shocked. "Why would you even think about that?" She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Sometimes I wonder if it's all just a test. Like, maybe nothing would happen. Maybe it's just a way to keep us in line." I shook my head. "Don't even joke about that, Sarah. You've seen what happens. You've heard the stories." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. That night, everything felt off. The air was heavy, the lights seemed dimmer than usual, and the store was eerily quiet. At 10:59, I locked the front doors. Sarah was in the back, checking inventory. At 11:30, the scratching started in the bathroom. I ignored it as always. At 12:15, the tall man came in, took his coffee, and stood in the corner. At 1 a.m., the lights flickered once, twice, 3 times. I called out to Sarah, "Back room." Now. We ran, slamming the door behind us. I checked my watch, counting down the 7 minutes. This time, the sounds were different. Instead of growling and dragging, we heard voices, whispers, laughter, the sound of footsteps running up and down the aisles. It felt like the store was full of people, but when the 7 minutes were up and we stepped out, the place was empty. Sarah looked shaken. "Did you hear them?" I nodded. "Every time it's different. Every time it's worse." We finished the shift in silence, both of us on edge. A week later, Sarah didn't show up for her shift. Mr. Harris called me, his voice tight. "She's not answering her phone. If you hear from her, let me know." I tried not to worry, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened. The next night, I worked alone. The store felt emptier than ever. At 10:59, I locked the front doors. At 11:30, the scratching started in the bathroom. At 12:15, the tall man came in, took his coffee, and stood in the corner. At 1 a.m., the lights flickered once, twice, 3 times. I ran to the back room, slamming the door behind me. I checked my watch, counting down the 7 minutes. This time, I heard a voice, Sarah's voice, calling my name. "Daniel, please help me. I'm scared. I don't know where I am." I squeezed my eyes shut, refusing to answer. The voice grew louder, more desperate. "Daniel, please, don't leave me here." I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block it out. When the 7 minutes were up, I stepped out into the store. Everything looked normal, but the air felt colder, emptier. I finished my shift in a daze, barely aware of what I was doing. When Mr. Harris arrived, he looked at me, concerned in his eyes. "You okay?" I shook my head. "Sarah," I heard her voice, "during the 7 minutes." He sighed, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Sometimes the store remembers. Sometimes it tries to bring people back. But they're not really back, Daniel. Not the way you remember. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After that, I was never quite the same. I moved through the world like a ghost, always watching, always waiting for something to go wrong. The rules were my only anchor, the only thing keeping me from slipping into the darkness. But I knew, deep down, that it was only a matter of time before the store claimed me, too. The last month of my time at Stop and Save felt like a countdown. Every shift, I wondered if it would be my last. I became hyper-vigilant, checking the clock every few minutes, reciting the rules in my head like a prayer. I barely slept. When I did, my dreams were filled with flickering lights, locked doors, and voices calling my name from the darkness. Ben noticed the change in me. He'd been at the store longer than anyone, but even he looked worn down, his eyes hollow and haunted. One night, as we were restocking the shelves, he said quietly, "You ever think about quitting?" I hesitated. "Every day, but I need the money. And I don't know if I could go back to a normal job after this." He nodded. "Yeah, it changes you, makes you see things differently." That night, the store was quieter than usual. No scratching in the bathroom, no desperate faces at the door. Even the tall man didn't show up for his coffee. The silence was almost worse than the chaos. At 2 a.m., the lights flickered once, then twice. I held my breath, waiting for the third blink. It never came. I let out a shaky sigh and went back to the counter. At 3 o'clock, Ben went to the back room to check inventory. I was alone at the register, staring at the security monitors, when I saw movement outside. A woman stood at the edge of the parking lot, just beyond the reach of the lights. She didn't move, didn't call out, just stood there, watching. I tried to ignore her, but every time I glanced at the monitor, she was still there. Finally, I looked away, focusing on the register, counting the minutes until dawn. At 4 o'clock, Ben returned, looking pale. "Did you see her?" I nodded. "She's still out there." He shivered. "Don't look at her. Don't acknowledge her. She's not real. Not anymore." We finished the shift in silence, both of us on edge. The next night was my last scheduled shift before my contract ended. Mr. Harris met me at the door, handing me an envelope. "Your final paycheck," he said. "You made it, Daniel. Most people don't." I took the envelope, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. "What happens now?" He shrugged. "You move on. Try to forget. But you never really do." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. That night, I went through the motions one last time. Locked the doors at 11 o'clock. Ignored the scratching in the bathroom. Gave the tall man his coffee. Hid in the back room when the lights flickered 3 times. I followed every rule, every step, as if my life depended on it, because I knew it did. At 5:45, as the sky began to lighten, I stood at the front doors, watching the sun rise over the empty parking lot. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. Ben joined me, sipping his coffee. "You did good, Daniel. You survived." I smiled, the first real smile in a long time. "Thanks. I couldn't have done it without you." He shrugged. "We all help each other. That's the only way." As the sun rose higher, I gathered my things and walked out of the store for the last time. The air felt different, lighter, cleaner, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I didn't look back. It's been 6 months since I left Stop and Save. I found a new job, a normal job, with normal hours and normal people. But I still check the locks 3 times before bed. I still flinch when the lights flicker. And sometimes, late at night, I hear scratching in the bathroom or see a tall man standing in the shadows, watching. I know I'll never really escape the store. The rules are part of me now, etched into my bones. But I survived. I made it out. And if you ever find yourself working the night shift at a place that pays double, remember this. Follow the rules. All of them. No matter how strange they seem. Because sometimes, the only thing standing between you and the darkness is a list of rules and the will to obey them.